Good morning, and I'm happy that I recorded this video after feeling unwell and having some technical issues with my new computer. And it took me some time given that I'm not techie. Now, for those who are watching this video for the first time, this is a part of our LexClassroom project, and it is part of my educational advocacy in order to make the knowledge of the law available to everyone, even to those who are not able to go to law school. Now, this project is totally independent and separate from my teaching job in the University of Cebu School of Law. I'm sorry if there's a noisy background because there's an airplane passing by now. Going back, again, Lex Classroom is a project in order to educate the public. Now, today's lesson actually is a continuation or the second part of our three lesson series. Now, we're still covering the COVID-19 pandemic laws, given that although in the Philippines now, the election is coming and all of the media sources will be giving you election campaigns. And it's like COVID-19 is put in the sideline. But you have to consider that in other jurisdictions, like in China, COVID is still affecting the public. And I still have clients and even friends abroad who are dealing with the disease. Now, I'm quite concerned also with this because you know that I got COVID-19 last year. Now, okay, again, going back to our lesson, it's human rights and COVID-19 pandemic. And ultimately, this lesson is going to address, is there a clash between human rights and the strategies or the mechanisms to address the COVID-19 pandemic that the government, as part of its policy, is doing? So, the previous lesson is more of the human rights in general. If you're going to watch the previous video, it's part of, it's better to watch the first video in order to have a comprehensive understanding of the subject. Now, today we will have the human rights law in general, but before we characterize or we indicated the characteristics of the of human rights. Now, in general, human rights are those, or human rights laws are those legislations with the aim to protect individuals and groups and their human rights. And in case of a violation, there is a corresponding penalty. And you have to consider that given that it is a legislation, there is an authority that handed it, or that's the basic definition of a law. It's handed down by legitimate authority. Now, international human rights laws are those obligations of governments vis-a-vis protection of human rights. So, when you are talking about international human rights law, the one obligated to protect would be the governments or the state itself, like the Philippines. The Republic of the Philippines is obligated to protect the human rights of all Filipinos and even foreigners here. One example later you would know would be the protection against torture. Now, you have, as a source of human rights law, we have in the Philippines, we have the 1987 Constitution. And to me, every citizen have to read the Constitution, understand it, not just in the English language, but also in the local language. I have not seen or have not read the Constitution in the Cebuano translation, although I've read both in the English and in Filipino. Now, if you look at the specific provisions of the 1987 Constitution, we have the Bill of Rights, which is found in Article 3, although the article numbers is not that important. But you have to consider that Article 3 is like the core of the Constitution because every Filipino must know the contents, the specific provisions of that article. Now, There are specific provisions in women, children, marginalized sectors like farmers, laborers. There's also specific provision on Commission on Human Rights, including health and even the environment. Now, you have to consider also that aside from the fundamental law of the land, the 1987 Constitution I'm referring to, we also have statutes. The statutes are actually is a composition of our legislative acts, just like the Republic Acts, and the presidential decrees, which is part of the power creation or of the president or the executive department, because we have presidential decrees which are in effect like that of a republic act, which everyone, if it is considered as a law or there's an imposition on that, you will know later that there's a presidential decree on related to patients' rights. Now, as I was referring or I was talking a while ago, the statutes could be republic acts, presidential decrees, and even if you have to consider also the local ordinances, the one passed by our LGUs. We have the province, the city, the municipality, and the barangay. So you have to consider that. Now, human rights in general talks about, or as the domestic law would cover, women and children, labor, indigenous peoples. We have the indigenous peoples or IP law, or now, the general application, or we have to classify that in every Republic Act or presidential decree, or in general the statutes, it has a general application and also a specific application. What do I mean by this? When you say general application, it specifies to a general topic. Although you would consider torture or rape, human trafficking, as you can see in the example. Now, this is in general. So every person who is covered or affected by that will have it's you can say, although the most general would be the human being or human rights per se, but secondary to that would be some subtopics like torture, rights of an individual under criminal investigation, individuals who could be victims of rape. Now, there's a more specific, if you're going to streamline that, we have Human Rights Victims Reparation Recognition Act of 2013. These are very specific law in which it applies to a very specific situation. It applies to a very specific individual. So as Presidential Decree 702, which was amended by RAA 344. Now it is very, very applicable this time, especially in the pandemic, because no clinic or health facility should refuse the admission of a patient, especially in serious cases, from initial treatment because of the inability to pay. And Filipinos, given that we really don't have a universal free healthcare, just like the advanced countries of the world, like Canada, some many countries in Europe. So we have to consider this law. Now, I know some individuals who really had problems, especially during the height of the lockdown and the pandemic, in which like so many people were lining up outside of the hospitals, and they were. Although later in the last part of the lesson, we will have to answer the very big question, or it's like the elephant in the room now, that is there a clash between human rights and the policies or the laws of the government or the Republic of the Philippines in addressing the COVID-19 pandemic? Now, you have to consider, as I specified from the beginning, that there are two general classification: the national and the international human rights law. Now, we will not be tackling this, but I have to mention this as part of the lesson. We will not be going into the specifics of this lesson. We have the three major sources of international human rights law. Although this is just a declaration, but I would consider this as like in a way a treaty or a customary international law in its classification. For those who are studying PIL and my students, I hope you know this. And we are very clear on the sources of public international law under Article 38 of the ICJ statute. Now, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It specifies the basic human rights of all peoples around the world, regardless of race, color, origin, religion, sexual orientation, and even birth circumstances. Now, we have another one, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And the last one I'm mentioning here would be the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. If we're going to consider these last two, or the second and the third source of international human rights law, actually there's classification as like between civil and political rights, then the economic, social, and cultural rights. And you will know later in future lesson what's the difference between these two groups of rights. Now, again, we have the laws pertaining to COVID-19. Now, in the next lesson, we will be dealing specifically these two, the national and local, because especially like there was a granular lockdown. The LGUs have the right to bar or prohibit the entry of unvaccinated people. And in fact, if I may, I may share, based on my record here in the Philippines, I am not vaccinated. Now, if since I had this concern because the there was no treaty yet as to recognizing the vaccination certificates from abroad, but it was only recently that there was a specific, I think, if I'm not mistaken, an IATF resolution, I think 158 or 154, if I'm not mistaken, that considered the vaccination certificate that I got abroad as to be recognized not based on a treaty or I forgot the specific term. Maybe the brain fog is affecting me so much now. But you have to consider that national laws may even clash with the local law. I even experienced one time that I could not get an S pass when I was from in Taboylan Port going to La Carlota, because I did not I could not attend the hearing because my S pass could not even be processed, or there was no request even if I submitted it. So although it could be considered as a procedural concern or technological concern, but it's always like we we have our own share of problems or predicaments during the pandemic, especially at the height of the pandemic. So in the next or in the last lesson, we will be dealing specifically the national and local laws. And if in preparation for the next lesson, you might even consider the the applicable laws in your own LGUs or in the Philippines. You can look into it, and actually the way I had myself updated during the the period via Facebook, because local governments are posting it. So, okay, again, our lesson is on the basically on the government's policy pertaining to COVID-19 pandemic. Now, to end this lesson, I want to again thank our Facebook followers and likers, and we are a growing community, and also our YouTube channel. And in fact, even I thank those subscribers that in fact, even if there's no video uploaded recently because of my problems here, there are still people who were able to find our channel. And in fact, I met three clients this month, and since I'm wearing mask inside my office and they could not even recognize that it's really me. So I thank them. I won't be mentioning your name, so I thank you. And also our LexClassroom website, which is an ongoing project, and we are honing it for everyone's use. And again, I thank those people who constantly shared our videos, and even to the extent of letting people know our project. And in fact, I want to congratulate, or no, I want to thank you. Sorry for the word because I get excited, especially that I have a hearing in an hour from now. I have to do some cross examination now. I want to thank Lex Talk World for giving me the award. And in fact, some of my friends sent me messages, but since every time I enter our house, the connection gets problematic, and I have, in fact, I even have to get out of our gate just to get a good signal. But again, I want to thank Lex Talk World and for recognizing the efforts of the team and our for the Lex Classroom team. Thank you again, and I hope you look forward for our next lesson. And look forward to the next lesson because we will be dealing with aside from the last part of our COVID-19 laws, we will be dealing with specifically the Ukraine and Russia crisis. And it's an important topic for me given that I'm a public international law professor in University of Cebu. And so as not to make this video long, I have to bid goodbye. Thank you very much and have a happy day and look forward to our quiz. I'm trying to catch up because I'm doing so many things. Thank you so much.